Hi, well, it's really fantastic to have with me Reverend Dr. Alex Harris today. And we're going to be looking at this whole thing of healthy church growth in the UK, especially in the Baptist context. Now, I know, Alex, that you're involved in quite a number of things, as I read, quite interesting. So you're part of the Fire Starters Network, leading that with Chrissy, I believe. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Um,
Yep, that's right.
Chrissy Remsburg, and also you're a Baptist regional minister as well, working in things like pioneering and church planting, evangelism, and things like that. And also, since 2022, you've also been a director of St. Church planting at St. Hildes College.
That's right.
So it sounds like you keep quite busy.
Yeah, no, they're great. They're great. I mean, lots of it overlaps. It's in terms of it's about helping churches to multiply, helping
Yeah.
churches to grow, helping churches to make the changes that might stimulate or catalyze that growth for our church. So different roles, but like significant overlap in terms of
Yeah.
actually what they're. Yeah, yeah.
No, that's great. And also you're a doctor, aren't you? Of course, in church planting. That was it. Your doctorate was in church planting, I believe,
Yeah,
in post-Christendom Europe. So very, very interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
So I think, obviously I'm looking at this in terms of becoming the incoming president of the Baptist Union, but also in terms of a dissertation that I'm doing for a master's in leadership as well for healthy church growth. So I'm really, really interested in the research that you've done and your experience of what's happening right now in the UK. I think we're quite exciting times in terms of seeing the growth of people again attending church, um, pursuing a relationship with God and with Jesus. And so I just from that perspective, I wanted to ask you first of all just about your book on this rock. I found really interesting, you and Chris's book, in terms of the seven principles that you've found that have come out of looking at growing churches. And I was just interested in terms of that, how does leadership relate to these principles, do you think, in terms of churches growing at this time?
Yeah, no, it's great. So the background to that book is, in essence, we did a piece of research where we looked at the fastest growing churches in the Baptist Union, growing by conversion. So actually, it was about baptisms and conversion
Yeah.
growth. And this was back in 2017, 2018, and we tried to pinpoint what was repeated and repeatable, i.e., what was repeated in every one of those churches. So what was consistent in the churches that was growing, but could also be repeated by another church. So we weren't looking for things like, oh, they're right in a city centre or they're really close to a university, because that's not repeatable by other churches.
Right.
So we're looking for things they were all doing, postures or traits that they all had, and which could be repeated by other churches. So that originally is where these seven kind of characteristics or traits came from, and they're not offered as a formula. If you do A plus B, you'll definitely get growth. They're simply offered as observations that
Yeah.
these are consistent traits of themes in churches that are growing. And then actually we work them through with about 150 churches that weren't growing. So having identified them, we then took 150 churches that weren't particularly growing on through a series of, we call them conversations. And actually we saw 73%, 73, sorry, of those 150, so around 50%, actually experienced significant growth once they
Wow.
started to try and implement the traits. And what we meant by significant growth is they saw twice as many baptisms in the year after as 5 years previously.
Wow.
So if they'd seen five baptisms in 5 years, they saw 10 in 1 year. Or if
Yeah.
they'd seen 50 in 5 years, they saw 100 in 1 year.
Yeah.
So real significant conversion growth. So that's where these traits came from. And in terms of your question about how does that relate to leadership, and I know particularly you're thinking about the APES model, and Alan Hirsch's stuff, I think probably
Yeah.
there's two observations I'd make. Number one is all the traits can be stimulated by leadership. So actually all the different traits either are suppressed by or catalyzed by leadership. So they kind of pivot on the kind of posture of the leaders that you have in place. Either those leaders actually will the nutrients that leadership put into the soil won't empower or enable the growth of those traits, or they'll put different kind of nutrients in the soil and these traits will grow in the life of the church. So the growth was because the body of the church shifted, but it was catalyzed or suppressed by the posture of leadership. So that's one observation. The second is, one of the key traits we found was churches that grow have an evangelist in the key decision-making or culture setting.
Yeah, I saw that.
Like,
yeah.
So we called that "Let Your Evangelist Be Heard." They did it in a number of different ways, but they all had someone who was an evangelist right at the heart of the decision-making and culture-making of the church, which often means in a diaconate or in a paid staff role or something like that. And that obviously sits very closely to Alan Hirsch's kind of, lots of his thinking is about, you need the rounded APEST action. You need all of those roles, all those offices, all those gifts that are found in APEST functioning. And I would argue that we don't. We're dominated by pastor teachers. Like, the loudest voices are the pastor teacher administrator. So we've even institutionalized that. The administrator is the church secretary. You have to have one, employ a pastor who also teaches, and those are the loudest voices. And so actually these churches that grew turned the volume up on the evangelist voice. They didn't mute the pastor. They didn't mute the teacher. They didn't mute the administrator. They honored those. They wanted those voices, but they turned the volume up in the orchestra, if you like. They turned the volume up on the evangelist as well. So it was a much more rounded leadership. And then that worked out in the church, more evangelism, more people came to faith, the church grows through conversion. So yeah, that's some of what we saw happen when it comes to leadership.
No, that's really amazing. And I'm just going to say the 7 principles in case people are listening and they don't know what they are. You said the first 3 are the most, you felt were the most important, prioritized, and then the others obviously were important as well. So the first one was intensity of prayer and fasting, gospel simply told, let your evangelists be heard, which is what you've just been speaking about, clarity and agreement. The people you have are enough. Take real risks, reorganize more often than you think. that was really amazing. I think that's such a valuable piece of work you've done there. Amazing. So secondly, the second question I've got for you is, tell me something about micro churches, and which Chrissy and your book Scattered Not Small is about. What's the kind of philosophy behind that, and do you think they contribute to healthy church growth, and if so, in what way?
No, that's great. So let's go scripture to world. So I think Acts invites us, the book of Acts in the Bible invites us not to think of it as a ancient record of what the church used to be, but that Acts is a living vision of what the church today should be. So I think Luke, who writes it, deliberately gives us signals that he's not writing a closed book. He's writing the first chapter of something that continues. So one of those signals is the very last word of Acts. The very last word at the end of Acts is the word unhindered. And to make it the last word, Luke butchers the grammar of that final sentence. And Luke, as a medical doctor, there's not a single grammatical mistake in the whole of Acts. It's pristine. It's some of the most sophisticated grammar and writing in the New Testament. He doesn't make any mistakes.
You'd give him a
and then he makes a mistake. He would have got a great grade at his thesis. But then he intentionally makes a mistake at the end. It's so stark. It's like this A-grade student has just made a real, entry-level mistake in the grammar. It's the way we would do it today. We would have bolded and italics and underlined. He's doing the equivalent so that the last word is unhindered, because he's trying to say, look, what God has been doing in Acts is what he will continue to do. And one of the things I see in Acts is when God bursts the church, when the Spirit births the church at Pentecost, the Spirit is in fact birthing twin sisters. The Spirit doesn't birth one church, but births twin sisters. One is Temple Courts. It's public, it's larger, it has recognized and trained and accredited leadership in priests. It engages with government and comes under government oversight. And the other twin sister, still full expression of church, is smaller, it's house to house, it's discreet, it's led by the matriarch or patriarch of the household with no official training, and it's much smaller. And so the Spirit is birthing twin sisters. So
Mm.
one is the larger kind of what we might think of a more classic traditional model of church with a building, a minister, a public gathering. The other is much more discreet, led by ordinary people in ordinary places, often but not limited to homes, and both are fully in divine God. What's interesting to me is they both have their Father God DNA. They're fully, truly Jesus's body in the
Yeah.
world, the church, but they have their mother culture DNA as well. So at that Pentecost moment, there was both Jews and Greeks, and Jews expected to meet God in the temple. So God burst the church true to their cultural expectation in the temple. The other grouping, the Gentiles, every family home had an ancestral shrine. Their place of divine encounter was the front room where the ancestral shrine was. And so God burst the church for them in their context, where they expected to meet with God. So these two twin sisters are birthed, and they have some kind of apostolic oversight linking them, but they're fundamentally different. So number one, I think microchurches have a place in our church ecosystem because Acts demands it. Like the unhindered growth of the church requires both twin sisters to flourish and be looked after if we're going to be an unhindered movement. Now, for 100 years in the UK, we've neglected the smaller sister and allowed the bigger twin sister to dominate. There's a bit of a shift, and we've created environments where the twin sisters bicker with each other and scrap with each other as opposed to complement each other, love each other. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
So biblically, I think it's important. Secondly, why I think it's really important for our Baptist world is, well, and any world, is because it releases people into leadership and deep discipleship, because it really does say it's a priesthood of all believers. That we're able to say, actually, we have space for priests to lead temple courts, because we have accredited ministers, and we have space for ordinary people to lead house to house, because actually we're all priests. And so there's the capacity to be priestly over a church for everybody, whether you're accredited or lay, clergy or laity, you know.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think it's very important practically, because I don't necessarily think microchurches reach more people.
Okay.
But I think microchurches reach people who are not being reached. So let me unpack that a little bit. So what I mean is, I've seen no statistical evidence that conversion rates are higher in microchurches than in temple court churches. But what I have seen,
helpful to know.
What I have seen is microchurches are able to reach people groups that otherwise would not be reached. So for example, if your main come and meet Jesus in his body is a Sunday morning expression, how do you reach shift workers who have to work every Sunday? You can't. But a microchurch on a Wednesday can do that, especially if it meets in the canteen of the workplace where everyone meets. Or say you meet on a Sunday morning with 100 people and 99 speak English, you're going to do it in English. But what about that Nepalese community that's recently moved into the town? Actually a microchurch can do that. Or just the sheer terror of walking into a church building, which for many people is a really terrifying experience. Well, it means they couldn't access a temple court. But actually, if it's in their friend's front room, who they've lived in the same street with for the last 7 years, and their friend says, "Hey, I'm going to do this little thing on a Tuesday. Could you come along? We're going to open the Bible." So there's some of the reasons why I'm really convinced. And in terms of Hirsch, one of the things Hirsch is brilliant when he talks about APEST is he scales it. So he often will talk about the seed of the apostle, if you like, being in someone, and so it's a little thing that they birth, not a big thing. And then for others, it scales. So actually, the microchurch allows it responds to the scale of the apostolic gifting in someone. That they are skilled to apostolically plant a church of 10.
Yes.
Well, if we are not providing them with a menu of microchurch and temple court, that thing will never birth, because they'll be like, I can't do the big thing. Yeah. So I don't know if that's helpful, Alex. There's some of my reflections, and that's what's behind Scattered Not Small is really a practical book on how to do it.
Yeah.
But that's the theology and thinking behind it.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. It makes me want to ask you lots of other questions, but I don't know if I should, because we might go off track. But I'll ask you one because we very much worked on the cell model over the years, which kind of brings temple court and house to house together in a way, but also gives the freedom for organic growth to take place just through the small, which could eventually be planting out, other congregations and stuff. So I just wonder if you, because I haven't looked at the scattered, not small that much. Yeah, is there any kind of dovetailing between those two?
Well, between the microchurch and the cell church kind of
Yeah.
idea, or cell groups. Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think one of the things we talk about in the book, Scattered Not Small, is there's a couple of practical avenues where you might start a microchurch. And one of them is that you just have really healthy small group. You have a really healthy cell group, small group,
Right. So
home
different.
group,
Yeah.
and it can evolve, into being a full expression of church itself. The question I think you've always got to ask is, what's your ecclesial minimum, your ecclesial threshold? I.e., what's the minimum requirement something needs to be church? And it can be something else that's good and wonderful, but it's not church unless it meets those requirements. I think when you're trying to do temple court and house to house together, like almost like Sunday and small groups, the constant challenge is do this. There's one or two ecclesial minimums. It's hard for those small groups to fully embody, because they stay under the shadow of the temple court, and the temple court offers it in such a way that they can't do it. So very small groups, cell groups, for example, are active in mission and evangelism. Like they normally are really good at pastorally caring for each other. They're normally really good at teaching the Bible, either doing their own Bible study or reflecting on the sermon they heard on Sunday. They meet regularly, they have good relationships with one another. They might even engage in a little bit of worship, at least in prayer. Maybe not worship, but certainly in prayer they do. But often the thing that's missing is the outreach. They're reaching new people. In fact, often those groups can actually be quite closed off to new people. Become a bit insular. But yeah, I think it's definitely a model to play around with. Yeah.
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 Okay. No, really helpful. Thank you. So sort of moving on a bit then to Alan Hirsch. Does Alan Hirsch's definition of an apostolic environment, I know he puts that in different ways, offer a style of leadership which might catalyze and facilitate growth in a Baptist setting or UK Baptist setting?
So I think my answer is yes, with a caveat.
Hmm.
So as I understand, when Hirsch uses language and concepts of apostolic environment, he's talking about a number of ingredients, isn't he? So in my head, they are things like there's a missional orientation, like the church isn't about self-preservation, but it's about growth.
Yeah.
Secondly, it's trying to be a movement, not an institute. It's trying to go somewhere and do something as opposed to be something and stay somewhere. So it's a movement, not an institute. It has a real sending culture, this idea that everyone is called and everybody is sent. Lots of kind of creative imagination, innovation, space for risk-taking and failure. And lastly, the authority mostly comes through influence and relationship, not through institutional position or power. Now, my understanding of Hirsch is those kind of 6 things, kind of in my language, are what he means by an apostolic environment. I think all of those are beautifully Baptist theology. Like when you think about it, or if you look at our declaration of principle, you see almost missional orientation, that every believer has. Well, it's right there, isn't it? Called to be a witness to the world. Movement, rather institutional, yes, because every church can decide its direction of travel and move in that direction of travel. It's not tethered to the center, which is classic institutional. It's released from the edges. Pioneering and ascending culture, well, that is the priesthood of all believers. Everyone is commissioned and called and ordained. Us Baptists believe our baptism is ordination. So the one event is the same thing happening. And the authority mostly through influence as opposed to positional power. Well, that is massively the case. The further you move up the ranks of the Baptist movement, the less authority you have. It's often how it could work. So yeah, so I think it does. I think Hirsch does offer a really good framework. I think they just dovetail. They just drop on top of each other. I think my hesitation is simply with the language. I think most of our Baptist world, in our ordinary everyday Baptist churches, find language of apostle, prophet, evangelist, particularly apostle, prophet, and evangelist. Either they don't understand it or they're actively turned off by it. And so I think there is wisdom in finding more acceptable language that's more digestible
Mm,
in our Baptist world than perhaps some of the APES language, even though it's biblical.
mm,
Of course, it's obviously biblical, but just from experience, I find in lots of our churches talking about where's the apostle, or where's the prophet,
mm,
or even where's the evangelist.
mm,
It is difficult for people to process.
mm.
Alternative language that says the same thing can be more helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. Hirsch is quite good, isn't he? On what I found was quite good, which would be quite helpful for people, is where he kind of equivalents what apostolic would be in just a secular institution or something like that, and how that works, and how you need that kind of pioneering figure, and the prophet is more like the agitator, questioning things, and that's all quite interesting, isn't it? I think that's quite
Yeah.
good
Yeah,
word.
yeah, no, it is, and most of our diaconates, live in secular worlds, don't they?
Mm,
And they totally understand the roles,
mm,
even if they need other language for it. But they totally understand the
yeah,
roles. I mean, I use APEST in disguise in lots of my leadership training
yeah,
stuff, but I do disguise it. But the mental skeleton I have in my head,
yeah,
and helping teams make sure every one of those voices is heard. I'd say one of the key principles of On This Rock is let your evangelist's voice be heard.
yeah. That was brilliant.
Basically, teams aren't balanced; they're missing that evangelist voice, so that they've not got the evangelist in there. So yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I think we're fighting against is, as I mentioned earlier, the 100+ year distortion
Yeah.
that churches should. I think we've made a 100 year, century-long twofold mistake. One, we think our churches are led by one person,
Yeah.
and two, we think the main voice should be the pastor teacher.
Yeah.
So loads of our churches, functionally, the pastor has disproportionate influence in the life of the church. They're a little bit of one man band, as opposed to really a true team.
Mm.
And secondly, as soon as the church has enough money to employ someone, they don't, without even thinking, they employ a pastor, which
Mm.
is an inward focus, like a pastor teacher. So the
Mm.
other challenge we have in applying APEST is we're constantly fighting against this idea
Mm.
that, I mean, if you think about it, if you're a church of 40 people in a town of 40,000, what that town needs is not a pastor teacher.
Mm.
What that town needs is an evangelist. It's
Mm.
obvious.
Mm.
But what churches do when they get to 40 people is say, now we need someone to come look after us and
Yes.
pastor us and teach
Yeah.
us. Anyway, that's by the by. That's by
No,
the by.
that's really helpful, because I think that that kind of is one of the things I'm trying to prize out. Is there something in our kind of way of being church, the traditional kind of way of with Baptists, and I'm sure with other denominations as well, that is kind of keeping the church small, actually, and it's keeping the church not reaching people. Is there some element in there that's doing that? But I'm sure we'll talk about that some more. But so the fourth question is, from your experience of working with growing Baptist churches, how do you understand healthy church growth, and how do you think growing churches understand healthy church growth? So it's this thing of healthy church growth. Take into account congregational growth and local impact. So obviously you have to define a bit what we mean by healthy, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I think, yeah, you need to define healthy. And actually, in that question, I think you need to define growth as well.
Hmm.
So I think there's two types of growth. There is addition growth and there's multiplication growth. Both are good. Both are good. You need a church needs to work out which one it's called to at which stage in its life, because the practices that stimulate one are anti the other. So let me just unpack that a little bit, I think, because I think it kind of answers the question. So addition growth looks something like, we're 20 people on a Sunday, we want to get to 100 people on a Sunday. So what makes it addition growth is the on the Sunday bit. Do you see what I mean? There's 20 people on a Sunday, let's make it 100 people on a Sunday. We want to add people to Sunday through conversion and discipleship. Great. The things you need to do to grow by addition are things like a brilliant welcome on a Sunday, really engaging worship, and a relevant word. And if you do those three things, you'll probably start to grow on a Sunday. If your welcome, your worship, and your word are really good on a Sunday, you will grow. And that probably means you need to employ someone who's really good at either the word or worship bit, and normally it's the word bit. And that's fantastic. That is a great pathway to addition growth on a Sunday. But most of what I've just described, which will stimulate addition growth, is anti-multiplication. So multiplication growth says we want to grow from being one thing of 20 on a Sunday to 20 things of 20 across the week. That's multiplication growth, because you're not adding more to one thing, you're creating multiple more things. Well, if you pay for a really great preacher to come in and preach on Sunday, that is anti-multiplication, because everyone else will look and go, I can't possibly do that. I'm not going to try. And it actually stops people having a go. The person you need to employ, or the posture you need to take, is a behind the scene person who's training everyone else up to be adequate at teaching the Bible. And if you have a behind the scene person who manages to train 20 people to adequately teach the Bible, you could start to have 20 things across a week, not just one. So you need to work out what kind of growth you want. I think both are biblical. Addition growth is biblical, and multiplication growth is biblical. And churches need to decide and discern what season they're in. If they're in a season of addition growth, great, you posture in one way to stimulate addition growth. But if you're in a season of multiplication growth, or you want to be a multiplying place, you have to do things quite differently. And as I say, there are things that are pro-addition growth, which are anti-multiplication.
Interesting.
And lots of churches don't get it. So they grow by addition. In every denomination, there is a plateau at 150 people. Churches find it impossible to get through 150 people. And that, for me, is 150 is about as big as you can grow through addition. After that, you've got to do multiplication in some way. What I mean by that is for a well-related, more extrovert pastor, they can relate to, one person can relate to about 150. Any more than that, they can't. Most people with certain gifts and skills can preach to a room of 150 really well, but they struggle once they get to 300. You know what I mean? So that's the moment when, okay, now we need to work out how to multiply. And churches don't. They just try and keep doing the things that help them grow, but they don't grow. They kind of plateau. New people come, but the back door is as big. So there's still people coming through the front door, but people are going through the back door. So it feels like they're growing because there's new people, there's baptisms, all the rest of it, but they're still bobbing 150. So you need to define kind of growth. I think Hirsch is really helpful for multiplication growth.
Right.
I think that's what he's about, is multiplication growth. So if our Baptist churches want to grow through multiplication, I think Hirsch and his thinking is brilliant. I think if actually the season you're in is God is just saying grow by addition, then some of Hirsch's stuff is less applicable in some senses. You need to do some other things. So that would be my comment on growth. My comment on health is faithfulness and fruitfulness are always my dimensions with health, and you need to have both. So you need to ask questions of faithfulness, spiritual health, how we're around the Bible, how we're around with each other, how we around conflict resolution, how do we hold difference, faithfulness markers, and you need fruitfulness markers. Are we growing numerically? Are there baptisms? Is our membership going up? Have we got younger adults and older generation being reached for Jesus effectively? Is there a leadership pipeline? Is there a discipleship pathway? Like their fruitfulness growth, and you need both. And again, you often see churches lean to one and neglect the other. So lots of churches say, but we've been faithful. We teach the Bible every Sunday. We pray for the world. We send our money to BMS. We've been faithful, but they've not been fruitful. And they kind of have not grown or Esther. And other churches go, we're all about being fruitful. Their growth is really quick. They reach new people. They've got loads of baptisms, but there's no roots. There's no depth,
Mm.
there's no texture, there's no resilience because they haven't thought about being faithful. So I think healthiness needs
Really
those two
helpful.
markers.
That's really helpful. I really like that. Um, can you say a bit more about what you would have to kind of shift at 150 to shift from kind of addition mindset to the multiplication mindset? What way would you have to think differently, and what practically would you have to do?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things you need to do. And it's not necessarily, by the way, you can get bigger than that on a Sunday morning, but you've probably done the multiplication thing. It's just you happen to gather on a Sunday morning as 300 or 500 or
Yeah.
whatever it might be. So
Mm.
it's not necessarily the structure on the outside. It's more the inside thing. So one is how do you relate? And so, for example, churches often grow because people feel connected to the minister. So the minister might not feel they know the people, but the people think they do know the minister. And partly that is because week by week that minister stands up and tells stories about their family, their life, and all the rest of it. So it's a disproportionate relationship. It's an imbalanced relationship, but people feel they know the pastor. But once you get to about 150, 120, it's impossible. The pastor starts to struggle to remember names, remember kids' names, remember dogs' names, that kind of stuff. So you need to scale the relationships, whether you introduce more staffing, whether you lean into a small group structure. So actually small group leaders start to act as mini pastors. Like you need to do relational scaling in some way. So it's how people relate to the pastor, how people relate to each other. So when churches are growing 50, 100, 120, people go, oh, it's great, it's great, it's great. And then suddenly you'll start to hear, but we don't know everybody anymore.
Yeah.
We used to know everybody, but we don't know everybody
Yeah.
anymore. I don't know everyone's name anymore, and what they're basically saying is how we relate has changed. I've lost my place. It's like the single child who suddenly gets a baby sister and doesn't quite know how they belong. They don't quite, how does this all work? So you've got to scale how people relate to each other. And again, that might be by going to 2 or 3 congregations. You go, growing to 150, let's go back to 3 groups of 50. And that comes with its own problems, but suddenly everyone does know each other. Or you say, let's have a really active small group thing. Or you church plant. You go, grown to 150, let's send 75 over there. We'll go back to 75 and we'll grow again. Plant again, grow again, plant again. But you need to think about the multiplication. So it's relating to the pastor, it's relating to each other. And then thirdly, it's the vehicles by which you do, in the old language, the spiritual disciplines. So how do people engage in worship? How do people engage in mutual accountability? How do people engage in reading the Bible? All those sorts of things. Again, most of that probably was quite centralized up to about 120, 150. To get through that, you need to decentralize it. Whatever that looks like. It'll look like in different.
Yeah.
You're constantly pushing it out.
No,
so there's some of the things, and it's the flip from doing addition growth to doing multiplication growth. It's that switch. Or you dodge the bullet by planting a new church.
Yeah.
So you through addition growth, you get to 150. And particularly if the minister goes, actually, my calling and my skills are addition growth. I can't reimagine myself. And not every leader can be a chameleon and reimagine themselves repeatedly. So actually what we'll do is we'll go back down to 75 and do it again. Now, when you have a minister or church that only want to do addition growth like that, either by calling or stubbornness, they won't. It will regulate back to about 75.
Yeah.
Your choice is, do you do it actively by planting a new church? So you're 150, so let's put 75 over there, we'll go back to 75. Or does it happen because you leak people in a very painful way until you're back to 75 and then you start growing again? And literally, there's statistical stories in our Baptist family, literally hundreds of statistical stories over the last 10 or 20, 30, 40 years. You can look back through the data of churches that go 50, 100, 150, 100, 50, 100, 150, 100. You can literally see it. And 1 or 2 do it through planting, but most have done it through decline. Grow, 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 decline, 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 grow, 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 decline, decline, decline. And it's because all our systems are built for addition growth. We train pastors, not apostles at college. We train teachers, not evangelists at college. Pioneers have a separate stream because no one knows what to do with them,
Yeah.
all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So that's where Hirsch is so good, you see, because Hirsch we have the skills in our Baptist family to do addition growth, but Hirsch brings in the skills to do multiplication growth. Some of that help, I think, by speaking, Alex.
No,
I'm rabbiting away, but I hope it's useful.
no, it's brilliant. I'm pressing you and lots is coming out. It's really, really excellent. Thank you. I think this is going to be really, really helpful. And I think a lot of what you've said as well kind of helps to understand where the weaknesses are as well in the system where we haven't been seeing this happen. So it's really good. So the fifth question is, can Hirsch's 5Q model catalyze healthy growth through discipleship? You sort of touched on that a little bit, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. So just help me. Help me understand what's behind your question. I didn't quite understand that question when I read it. As in why the discipleship theme that you're bringing in there.
Well, I think it's just thinking about maybe the word healthy church growth. So thinking that you haven't just got numbers in a room, but they're actually being developed, they're being matured, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Does the 5Q model have that?
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, I think the 5
a minister in a sense, you know.
Yeah. I think my answer there probably, Alex, is yes and no. Hirsch is championing a particular model for particular reasons, like we all do. That's how it works, isn't it? I think when he makes arguments that it's healthy for discipleship, which he does, but only in his later books. Hirsch has written about this for 20 years, so in lots of ways he comes at the same theme in numerous different books from a slightly different angle, and it's often in response to a big question mark that's arisen in the church. And in more recent years, a big question mark that's risen in the church is discipleship. So Hirsch's more recent books talk more about discipleship and APES, but I don't actually think Hirsch's main motivator is discipleship. I think Hirsch is an apostolic teacher himself. His two probably main giftings are apostolic teacher. So what he wants to do is stimulate new things and innovation and catalyze new things and those sorts of things. So I'm cautious about using 5Q as a discipleship tool. It's a bit like using a shoe to hammer a nail in. Yeah, it can do it, but it's not what it was designed to do.
Right.
And I think the 5Q in relation to discipleship, it's designed to help think through growth, leadership development, team dynamics, multiplication.
Yeah.
You can use it to tackle discipleship, but it's not designed for discipleship. So that'd be my slight sort of caution. Where I do think it is helpful for discipleship is you can use it to identify the gift matrix of somebody. And like you said earlier, Hirsch doesn't limit this to a Christian context. So actually you can talk to people who aren't yet Christians and I help them identify their gift mix. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then design discipleship pathways bespoke to that person. So someone who's like a super high-end apostle is going to have a slightly different discipleship journey, might help them much more than someone who's a high-end pastor, for example. So using it as a tool to kind of identify perhaps, someone's personality and traits and tendencies, and then going, okay, so this is how we mitigate some of the risks that will relate to you. So I would probably, on Hirsch's, 5Q thing, I'd probably come out quite apostolic. So I constantly need a reminder to finish things, not just to start things. So my discipleship can adjust my discipleship journey for that. So that might be some of my thoughts around that. And I think there's just something about using tools in the way that the original person designed them for. Yeah.
That is so helpful. Thank you so much. I mean, that's been amazing. This has been an amazing conversation, and I hope anyone who taps into it gets something out of it as well. But I think there's been some amazing keys in here that can do some incredible things for, Baptist churches across the country, let alone every
Yeah.
church across the country. I think, these are times where we need to be making sure we are facilitating the growth that God's bringing
Yeah.
and not
Yeah.
not suppressing it, if you know what I mean. So I think
Yeah.
that's really, really helpful. No,
Yeah. No, an absolute delight. Yeah.
thank you very much.